Today we're going to be making clay cakes inspired by the American artist Wayne Thiebaud. While we're making our cakes, we're going to be thinking about the element of form, which is taking shapes that are two-dimensional and flat and turning them into something 3D, like the shape of this three-dimensional cake. To make this cake, we're going to need some sort of base or armature to go under the cake, and I'm going to be using this yogurt cup. It's about the right size. And then you're going to need some Crayola Model Magic in whatever color you want the outside of the frosting to be. So I'm just going to go with vanilla frosting, and I have about 1.5 ounces of clay here. That should be enough. I'm going to move this aside. And the first thing you need to do with your clay is you need to flatten it into a circular disc. So the best way to do that is to just kind of roll it into a ball and then flatten it out and stretch it out almost like you're making a pizza crust. Once you've gotten it pretty thin, you can take a rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin handy, I'm just using this old highlighter I found at my house, and you can just roll the clay. Model Magic can be a little bit sticky, so make sure you keep flipping it as you roll. Once you get it big enough, you're going to want to check, and you're going to want to see if it's going to fit on this, and that's obviously too thick and too big. So I'm going to keep rolling and then get back to you guys. Okay, I've pulled and rolled and stretched my clay, and it's about the right size to drape over this. And I can see that it might be a little short in some areas, but that's fine as long as the main part will cover it. And what you're actually going to do before you cover your base, you're going to put a piece of plastic wrap over the base and then kind of tuck it inside, because what you want is you're actually going to remove this base once the clay starts to dry. Otherwise, if you leave it inside, you're going to get all these cracks all over your clay, like I have on mine, because as the clay dries, it shrinks a little bit and it's going to crack because that base inside of it won't shrink. So we want the plastic wrap here so that we can remove it later. So once you have the plastic wrap on, you're just going to gently put this down, and I'm going to gently pull it, not hard enough that it's going to break it, but stretch it out a little bit, and then I'm just going to start molding it down around the sides. Because, oops, if you get a little hole like that, that's fine, you can patch it later. Because we're going to be taking this cup out, don't wrap your clay around it. That's going to make it a lot harder for you later. If you have a little bit extra, you can just patch that. We're going to be putting all those decorations on the cake, so that part will be hidden. Once you have it gently stretched out, you'll want to start wrapping it around the base. If you have a little bit of extra, you can fold it over like that and then put those two pieces together. Once you have the base of your cake covered, you are going to take just regular scissors and cut along the edge of the cake. Again, making sure that none of the edges are wrapped around that base so that you can remove it later. Now that the base of my cake is finished, I get to do the fun part, which is deciding how I'm going to decorate it. Because you're thinking about forms, which is a three-dimensional shape, you need to think about not only the top, but you also need to think about all the sides of it and how those decorations that you make will all match and go together, how you will give your cake unity. There's a lot of different clay techniques you can use to do this. I'm going to show you a few here. The first one is if you want to make frosting around an edge, you're going to use the clay technique of rolling a coil. If you want a skinny line of frosting, you'll roll a really thin coil. Otherwise, roll yourself a thicker coil. And if you see one area, you can see this area is getting thicker, then I'll just spend my time carefully rolling out that area. Now if you want to make it scalloped like I did, I actually took this and I used my finger and I pressed down every so often. That gives you a scalloped edge when you turn it sideways. And then Model Magic is sticky, so you're going to want to gently place it on until you're sure you have it just where you want it. Once you press it down, it's going to be stuck there for good, and it's really hard to get off. So make sure you like it before you press it down. You can see I didn't measure well. I have a little bit of a gap here, so I think I can gently, carefully stretch that Model Magic to make it fit. I'm going to show you a few more clips of techniques that I actually used for making a different type of cake, but the same thing applies to all of these. A lot of bakers will put a decorative edge along their cake, and I've done that here on my example. If you want to do something like that, you would roll out two coils in the colors that you want. If you want to do a braid, you could roll out 3 coils and attach them at the top. And then again, if you're doing a braid, you would start to braid. If you want to twist, you can just start to twist those 2 pieces together. You can twist it as tightly or as loosely as you want. You're going to get different effects either way. When you're happy with how it looks, you'll stick it down along your cake. And once it sticks, it's gonna hold that twist down, and then you can just use your scissors to trim that off, and then you could use this extra piece along the bottom if you want, or you could use it somewhere else for other decorations on your cake. Another really cool thing you can do is you can mix the colors. So here I've started with yellow and blue, and I've started to mix it, but I haven't finished mixing it all the way. If I continue to mix it, I'll get a new color, I'll get a green, but you can also use that slightly marbled piece to create some really cool effects too. And you can see I've done this on this cake. I had some clay that had some green and some purple and some pink, and instead of mixing it all together, which would probably end up with a brown, you can start to see it started to make a little bit of brown here, I left it unmixed and used that to make this swirl decoration, and I also used another coil to make a heart on the top. Another great technique can be to add sprinkles on the top of your cake. You're just going to choose a lot of small pieces and stick them down. Here I've also done some circles on the back of my cake, and to make that I just rolled some spheres, smushed them in my fingers like that, and you can just stick that right on the back of your cake. You want to think about the colors you're using. You want to think about how colors mix and what you know about the color wheel. And you'll also want to think about how your colors all go together, that you don't have too many crazy things going on your cake, that you have some unity, some things that are all the same about your cake. Since I have my lemon and lime theme going on here, I think I'll maybe put some lemons on top of my cake, like I have the strawberries on top of this cake. Think about how you would draw them on a piece of paper, and then think about how you would sculpt that, how you would turn that flat thing that you would draw into a 3-dimensional shape. You can also use a marker or a Sharpie. Here I've used a fine point Sharpie to add those little seeds, those little details that would be really hard to get with the clay. One other thing I wanted to show you is a candle. You can make a candle if you want. Just keep in mind that the only thing holding this clay together is itself, and so when it dries it might fall off these little pieces, so we might end up having to glue those back together, and that's fine. The last thing I wanted to show you is how to make a clay flower. You would start off with a flat rectangle of clay and then use your finger to press down a scalloped line along the top, and then simply start to roll that flower up, keeping it really tight at the bottom down here and looser up on the top here, and just keep rolling, and it's going to start to make a flower shape, kind of like a rose, and then you could sculpt some leaves, you could do bunches of flowers, put them on the top or the back of your cake. Really, the ideas can be endless. There's a lot of different really fun things you can do with this cake. I finished my cake. I went with a daisy theme. Now the trick is when you're done, you need to go flip it over and gently hold it and make sure that you can pull it away from the outside of whatever you used for your base. That way you know that you'll be able to remove it in a little bit. The best way to keep it from cracking is to dry it as slowly as possible. So I would actually put a little bit of plastic just loosely over the cake, maybe for a few hours to let it start drying out. Once it's started to dry out, you're going to gently take it, unwrap this plastic that's covering the inside of this base, and very carefully remove that base. Then you can pull this plastic away too, because it won't dry if that plastic is sitting right up against it. You could actually put it loosely back in. I would use something to support this while it continues to dry. So a paper towel might be good, a piece of scrap paper rolled up into a ball, just something that will help it hold its shape. And then I would again put this plastic loosely over it and let it dry for a day or two, just really slowly this way, slowly removing the plastic from it, giving it a chance to dry without cracking. You might get a few cracks, but that's just kind of the nature of the material that we're working with. The last thing you're going to want to do is once it's completely dry, you'll seal it with Mod Podge. So just paint over with a glossy Mod Podge, and that will give it a nice finish and a nice shiny coat.